When a man is cornered by poverty, ignored by justice, and stripped of hope sometimes, he doesn't become a victim. He becomes something else entirely. This is the story of John Dillinger, the boy who grew up watching his world fall apart and chose to fight back by becoming the most notorious bank robber America had ever seen. John Herbert Dillinger was born on June 22, 1903, in the working-class neighborhood of Indianapolis, Indiana. His mother died when he was just 4 years old, and though his father John Sr. tried to raise him, he was a strict and emotionally distant man. "I was never sure whether my father loved me or feared me," Dillinger would later say. That feeling of isolation, of being misunderstood, would define his early years. By the time John was in his teens, he had already built a reputation as a troublemaker. He dropped out of school, ran with street gangs, and got into fights. His father, hoping to save him, moved the family to the small town of Mooresville, Indiana, thinking a quiet life would straighten his boy out. But John wasn't built for silence or submission. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, America crumbled. Factories closed, bread lines grew. Men stood on corners in their Sunday best, waiting for work that would never come. Banks foreclosed. On homes, farms were seized, and hope became a currency more rare than gold. For working-class families like the Dillingers, life didn't just get harder, it got personal. That same year, Dillinger broke and desperate committed his first major crime, an attempted robbery of a local grocer named Frank Morgan. He was caught almost immediately, and the court threw the book at him. The judge wanted to make an example. Dillinger was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. In that moment, something inside him changed. The young man who had made one foolish mistake entered Indiana State Prison as a low-level offender and came out a hardened outlaw. He later said, "I went in with a diploma in ignorance and came out with a PhD in crime." Why? Because inside that prison were some of the most dangerous men in the Midwest. And Dillinger, he listened, he learned, he built a network. One of those men was Harry Pierpont, who would become the leader of the first Dillinger gang. Behind bars, they planned. Outside, they would execute. Meanwhile, the outside world was on fire. The American people were furious. The banks that had stolen their homes were protected by police, while men like Dillinger, men who took back from the banks, began to look less like villains and more like vigilantes. By the time Dillinger was paroled in 1933, America had changed, and so had he. He walked out of prison a man with a mission, not just to survive, but to take control of his fate. No more begging for work. No more groveling to a system that saw poor men as expendable. He didn't rob for the thrill. He robbed because he believed the system was already robbing everyone else. Within months of his release, Dillinger robbed his first bank in New Carlisle, Ohio, escaping with over $10,000, a small fortune during the Depression. But this was just the beginning. The boy from Indiana was about to become public enemy. No, and America. It couldn't take its eyes off him. As soon as Dillinger walked out of prison in May 1933, the world outside was a powder keg. Breadlines stretched around city blocks, and headlines screamed about foreclosures and bank failures. But in the shadows, Dillinger had already set his sights on the very institutions that had left millions in ruin, the banks. His first big score was the New Carlisle National Bank in Ohio, where he and his newly formed crew burst in, weapons drawn. In under 3 minutes, they were gone $10,000 richer. Locals whispered that the tellers never even had time to hit the alarm. This was the start of a spree that would etch Dillinger's name into American folklore. Over the next year, he and his gang robbed at least 10 banks across Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Wisconsin, often in broad daylight, sometimes hitting 2 banks in the same week. Each heist was executed with military precision, thanks to plans Dillinger and Harry Pierpont had perfected behind bars. They cased every building, mapped every exit, and even memorized police patrol schedules. His gang carried Thompson's submachine guns, stolen from police stations, stirring the firepower of the law against itself. One FBI agent later said, "They moved faster than any outfit we'd ever seen." But what made Dillinger more than just a criminal was his flair. Witnesses described him as smiling during robberies, joking with tellers. In one legendary holdup, a bank customer tried to slip his own money into his pocket. Dillinger gently pulled it out, smiled, and told him, "We only want the bank's money, Mr. Too Many." He wasn't a thief, he was a rebel, taking revenge on the banks that had ruined their lives. His audacity fueled a media frenzy. Newspapers splashed his name across front pages with headlines like "Dillinger Strikes Again" or "Public Enemy, Node 1 Mocks the Law." In an America desperate for hope or, at least, distraction, Dillingers, robberies felt like a real-life gangster movie playing out in the streets. In September 1933, Dillinger's legend grew even more brazen. He was arrested and held in Lima, Ohio, but his gang wouldn't let him rot. Just days later, 3 of his men posing as Indiana state detectives stormed the jail, shot the sheriff dead, and freed Dillinger in a hail of gunfire. Breakout so shocking that it made the front page of every major newspaper. The public marveled. The authorities seethed. As his fame exploded, so did the cat-and-mouse game with law enforcement. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, trying to establish the Bureau's power, personally labeled Dillinger Public Enemy No One. Hoover poured resources into tracking him new squads of agents, better weapons, faster cars. But every time they thought they had him cornered, Dillinger disappeared like smoke. Part of his success was thanks to his network of loyal criminals. Another part, he simply moved faster than the cops. Dillinger's crew switched cars with stolen license plates, had safe houses across state lines, and moved between small towns where the FBI had little reach. The more the press covered him, the more the public adored him. In a nation where banks foreclosed on family farms, Dillinger's robberies felt almost righteous. Letters poured into newspaper offices, praising his guts. Children played cops and robbers, shouting his name. The man was becoming a myth while still alive, but for all the admiration, the law was closing in. Dillinger knew it. His heists grew riskier. His nights grew shorter. And every time he looked over his shoulder, the shadows felt just a little bit closer. John Dillinger had made the banks his playground, and America couldn't look away. But deep down, he knew the game would have to end. The only question was, how? By the end of 1933, Dillinger had already embarrassed law enforcement with his string of successful bank robberies. But it was his prison escapes that turned him from an infamous criminal into a living legend. The first and most shocking came in October 1933, when Dillinger was being held at the county jail in Lima, Ohio. After his initial arrest, his gang members, disguised as officers, entered the jail under the pretense of transferring him. When the sheriff demanded proper identification, the men drew their guns. In the chaos, they shot Sheriff Jess Sarber dead, grabbed Dillinger, and vanished into the night. Newspapers called it a rescue mission, like something out of a gangster film. But Dillinger's most famous and almost unbelievable escape came just a few months later, in March 1934, at the supposedly escape-proof Crown Point jail in Indiana. After his capture in Tucson, Arizona, Dillinger was sent to Crown Point. Under heavy guard, the local authorities wanted a show. They gave interviews boasting that Dillinger will never break out of this place. The sheriff even posed for photos with him. Days later, Dillinger carved a fake gun out of a piece of wood, darkened it with shoe polish, and used it to bluff his way past guards. He locked up the jail staff, stole the sheriff's brand-new Ford V8, and sped off-right past the state line. By taking the stolen car across state borders, he violated the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act, giving the newly empowered FBI the jurisdiction they needed to chase him nationwide. The escape made Dillinger a hero to some, a devil to others, but an obsession to the FBI. Hoover himself vowed to catch him or die trying. The Bureau tripled its agents, upgraded their weapons, and developed better forensics. But Dillinger kept moving. He used safe houses in Chicago, resorted to disguises, and even underwent plastic surgery to alter his appearance, a brutal operation that included removing moles, lifting scars, and reshaping his nose. It was so painful and crude that Dillinger needed ether for hours at a time, and it barely worked. Still, he tried everything to stay unrecognizable. His girlfriend at the time, Evelyn Billy Frechette, traveled with him from city to city, sharing cramped apartments and stolen moments of peace. But peace was always temporary. One night in April 1934, Dillinger barely escaped an FBI raid at the Little Bohemia Lodge in Wisconsin. Agents tipped off, arrived guns blazing, but shot innocent guests instead, letting Dillinger and his crew flee into the Northwoods under cover of darkness. The debacle humiliated the FBI yet again. By now, Dillinger wasn't just on the run. He was an icon of defiance. Magazine covers splashed his name. Radio shows recounted his heists. Children played Dillinger in schoolyards. Some Americans called him a cold-blooded killer, but others secretly rooted for the outlaw who outsmarted the men in suits. But each narrow escape wore him down. His crew shrank as members were killed or caught. His safe houses grew fewer. And every road seemed to end in a dead end. John Dillinger had made a game of outwitting the law. He had turned every police dragnet into a punchline, every arrest into an opportunity to slip away. But as summer 1934 approached, he began to sense the truth: no outlaw can escape forever. The law only needs to get lucky once. The net finally began to close, thanks to an unlikely source, Anna Sage, a brothel madam from Romania, also known as the Woman in Red. Facing deportation, Anna made a desperate bargain with federal agents. She would give them Dillinger in exchange for a chance to stay in the United States. Anna knew Dillinger had been staying with his new girlfriend, Polly Hamilton, and often took her out in public. On the evening of July 22, 1934, Anna tipped off agents that Dillinger planned to take Polly to see a gangster movie, Manhattan Melodrama at the Biograph Theater on North Lincoln Avenue in Chicago. Hoover immediately dispatched his best men, including Agent Melvin Purvis, to surround the area that hot summer night. Dillinger arrived at the Biograph, dressed casually, blending in with the crowd. As the final credits rolled, agents quietly took positions. Anna, true to her word, wore a bright orange skirt under the theater lights, later immortalized in legend as Red. She stepped out with Dillinger and Polly, pointing him out by simply walking beside him. Dillinger, relaxed and smiling, had no idea dozens of eyes were fixed on him. But the second he stepped into the warm July air, something shifted. He sensed movement in the shadows, agents emerging from doorways, guns drawn. For a fraction of a second, he looked around, realizing the trap had sprung. He bolted. He made it less than a dozen steps down the sidewalk before gunfire erupted. Witnesses said they heard the cracks of at least 3 shots. One bullet struck him from behind, severing his spinal cord. Another passed through his neck. A third hit him near his heart. He fell face first onto the pavement outside the theater, his blood spilling onto the sidewalk. As people screamed, FBI agents quickly formed a circle. Melvin Purvis approached the dying man, confirming the impossible: John Dillinger. Public enemy, no. One was dead at just 31 years old. Word spread instantly. Crowds gathered around the Biograph, pressing forward to glimpse the body lying in the street. Children who had idolized him wept. Adults who feared him sighed in relief. For some, it was justice. For others, it was the end of a legend. At the morgue, thousands lined up to see the lifeless face of the man who had defied the law so many times. Newspapers printed photos of his corpse. Souvenir hunters dipped handkerchiefs into the pool of blood on the sidewalk. Hoping to keep a piece of history, his father claimed the body and brought it home to Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. At his funeral, guards were posted to keep the curious at bay. Dillinger's grave became a macabre pilgrimage site over the years. It was even rumored his headstone had to be replaced multiple times because people kept chipping off pieces. As keepsakes in death, Dillinger cemented his status as a symbol of both rebellion and recklessness. Man who danced on the edge until the music stopped. His life forced America to confront its love-hate relationship with outlaws. Fascinated by their defiance, horrified by their violence, and though the world has changed, the story of John Dillinger still lives in echo from an America torn by desperation, when a poor boy from Indiana showed the nation how far one man could go when he had nothing left to lose.